The top business stories live from the Sky newsroom. UK business leaders are heading to Downing Street to discuss new contracts today from that boost in defence spending. Following the disastrous Oval Office meeting, can Ukraine still strike a minerals deal with the United States? Plus, will WHSmith be the latest big name to disappear from a high street? Very good morning on this Monday, Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. Now, business leaders from the UK's small and medium-sized defence companies are meeting ministers in Downing Street today as the government looks to boost supply chains for the armed forces. The Prime Minister has announced that defence spending will increase to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. The MOD says that as many as 12,000 companies could be supported by the extra cash. Let's speak to Andy Thomas. He's Chief Executive of the Independent Defence and Technology Group Cohort. Very good morning to you, Andy. Just first of all, on this increase in defence spending, I assume this is something you would welcome. But we've already seen, haven't we, quite a substantial increase in defence production over the last couple of years.
Yes, good morning. And it is something very much that we welcome, and especially the emphasis on the importance of small and medium-sized companies. I think it's become very obvious from what's been happening in Ukraine over recent years that defence industry is a really important component in the defence capability of a nation. And small and medium-sized businesses bring innovation, agility, speed of response to a much greater extent, perhaps, than the traditional very large defence prime contractors can.
And Andy, you are part of a group that works with and owns lots of different sectors. What is our capacity like here in the UK when it comes to defence production?
The UK has one of Europe's largest and most successful defence industries. I mean, not only do we produce a great deal of the defence equipment used by the British Armed Forces, but also exporting all around the world. And that's certainly true of the 7 companies that are part of the Cohort group. What we've tried to do is to harness within a wider group that has the benefit of access to capital through the stock market and the ability to interact at a high level with governments all around the world, but bring within that the innovation, agility and speed of those smaller businesses that bring all of those attributes that are very, very important to defence.
As you say, the government do seem to be focusing on trying to make this production, this increase, this defence spending largely spent at home here in the United Kingdom. In part, is that, and some people have pointed this out, that the United States, who we've normally worked with quite closely in the past, is not necessarily a reliable ally. And thus, that we do have to think about production here at home, just in terms of that practical basis.
Well, I think the reason for thinking about maximising production in the UK, firstly, as the government has said, it's about national prosperity, but also it's about having short supply lines and reliable supply lines in time of conflict when external suppliers might have other priorities that they need to deal with. And again, I think the example of Ukraine and the importance of defence supply into Ukraine has really emphasised that.
And just in terms of what's important these days when it comes to defence, there's been a lot of focus over the weekend about British troops and the number of British troops that could operate inside Ukraine, focus on the size of the army. What is your sense of that? Because many people would say one of the reasons Ukraine has been pretty successful to date is because they've built up this enormously successful drone business, if you like, that has been very effective, i.e. what I'm trying to get at here is that defence capabilities and what you would need in any war, for example, technologically is changing massively.
Yeah, it really is doing so. And the use of autonomous systems, not just flying drones, but also surface ships and underwater vessels with autonomy. The importance of those is increasing dramatically. I mean, not only do they enable you to extend your ability to gather information and to act in much more dangerous places than you would want to send a manned equivalent. But also, at times when recruitment is becoming increasingly difficult, it enables you to do what you need to do with less people. So those technologies are becoming increasingly important. Our business supports those. For example, one of the businesses in our group is Australia's main provider, digital satellite communications, which are vital for fast digital communication over long ranges that enable you to control those future autonomous unmanned systems.
OK, Andy, we're going to leave it there if we can, but really interesting, and we know that clearly there will be further announcements when we get a sense of what the military and our defence capability is going to look like with that defence review later on this year. That is Andy Thomas there from Cohort. Thank you. And don't forget, you can get more on that and indeed the rest of the business news. All you need to do is scan the QR code that's on your screen right now to access the Money blog that you can get on the Sky News app. Let's just bring you up to date with a little bit of breaking news coming into us this hour here at Sky. It involves a number of migrants crossing the English Channel, and according to government sources this morning, 592 people arrived yesterday on 11 different boats. Now, that is the highest number of migrants who've managed to cross the English Channel this year. Clearly, it has been a big political issue. Tens of thousands arriving every single year over the last couple of years. We've had a good weekend of weather. That is normally a determinant for people's ability to cross the English Channel. But as I say, we have got the highest number of arrivals so far this year, with 592 people arriving on 11 different boats. And we'll have more on that story, of course, at the top of the hour. Now, President Zelensky was at the White House on Friday to sign a deal that would have given the US rights to his country's minerals in exchange for American security guarantees. What happened next, of course, is history, but the big question is, can that deal be revived? And what is Ukraine and US relations like at the moment? Let's speak to Karolinda Atspodina, who is the Ukrainian co-founder and chief executive of the tech firm We Do Solar and a Europe leader of the Obama Foundation. Very good morning to you. Before we get on to talk about your company, just give us your sense as someone who I think was born in Ukraine but have lived in different parts of Europe. What your sense of that meeting on Friday, that very public disagreement between President Zelensky and Donald Trump?
Yeah, I think like any Ukrainian right now, or not even Ukrainian, everyone saw that this was quite a big fail of diplomacy that we have seen in a very long time. And I really, really hope that this is something that can be resurrected, and actually America can still be our ally, not only in Europe, but also for Ukraine.
Do you worry now that Ukraine's future is more precarious than it's ever been?
Absolutely. It has been 3 years that our people are fighting for their life. A lot of people have died, and we really want to make sure that we come to terms and that we get that freedom that we have been craving for the past, actually more than 3 years. But I think the last 3 years have been extremely extensive, with Russia really pushing and killing our people. So, yeah, I really hope that we will come to terms. And I think right now, more than ever, Europe, can step up, and they are stepping up. I'm happy to see all the leaders stepping up and actually supporting Ukraine and being there as they said they would be.
Now, you're a business person, as is Donald Trump, as he keeps famously reminding everyone. We're talking about this minerals deal. I mean, do you think that Ukraine should be prepared to hand these rare earth minerals over to the United States, even without a security guarantee, if it improves relations between Ukraine and the current US administration?
I don't think this is a good deal, obviously, if we don't get any guarantees. This is probably why the deal has not been signed, even if we're not talking about the incident that happened on Friday. But I do see, that Donald Trump basically sees his presidency kind of like a business, which unfortunately, when we're looking at diplomatic relations, this is not how everything works. And I really hope that some kind of deal can be definitely striked, whether it's a minerals deal or not. We want to make sure that we have our land, that we are not giving up our land, and that we are protecting our people at all costs. So there has to be guarantees for Ukraine that Russia will not go further. And also Europe, I think, is also in a very vulnerable state right now, especially the Baltic states. So we have to be prepared.
Let's talk about your company, We Do Solar. The idea in many ways, of course, is renewable energy, isn't it? But it was also, I think, an attempt to provide energy at a time, of course, in which Russian taps were turned off and energy crisis increased. How have things been over the last couple of years?
Absolutely, very intense. We started the company before the war actually started. And of course, as soon as the war broke out, we saw a huge increase in people buying our systems simply because they were created to be put on balconies and to make sure that everyone who doesn't live, for example, in a house but lives in an apartment can also afford to reduce their energy bills, but can also have energy if we have shortages of energy while we were turning off the oil and gas from Russia.
OK, Carolinda, really appreciate your time this morning there from We Do Solar. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now, it was a big day for world trade, or it could be tomorrow, with President Trump's tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico expected to come into effect. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has confirmed yesterday that they will be introduced, but it's still unclear whether they'll be as high as the 25% that Donald Trump has suggested. Well, let's speak to Kellyanne Shaw. She is a partner at the global law firm Hogan Lovells and is a former trade official in the previous Trump administration. Kellyanne, thank you for joining us. A very good morning to you. Before we get on to tariffs and trade, can we just talk about, just because we just were about that meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky on Friday. You know President Trump, you know his demeanour, his personality. Do you think the Ukrainian president dealt with that situation, whether he was goaded or not, very well?
Yeah, well, what I'll say, and thank you so much for having me on. I was the lead negotiator for the United States for the G7 and the G20 and worked very closely with President Trump and a number of world leaders and was involved in many of the bilateral meetings between leaders. And I can tell you that that level of contention is not uncommon, given some of the stakes of the issues that leaders discuss. What was unique about Friday was the fact that it played out on camera. So what I will say is that I do think there is a path for President Zelensky and President Trump to either continue with the critical mineral deal or work together to try to find some long-lasting peace deal. But it certainly didn't help the relationship, what happened on Friday. I do think, however, leaders often have these kinds of conflicts given the stakes, and they are able to come together and resolve things in the future.
Yeah, it does seem that Donald Trump can be very easy to kind of forgive and forget, can't he? But at the same time, I suppose, whether we're talking about President Zelensky or indeed any other world leaders, even when it comes to tariffs, they need to understand the man, don't they? And, you know, he's someone who likes people in the sense that it's his way of trading is not necessarily on big facts and ideas. It's about that personal relationship, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I would say it's all of the above, right? He is not going to be interested in negotiating a deal that he doesn't think is substantively good for the United States and the U.S. people. But that said, I think you're absolutely right that President Trump is very relational. And that's something that a lot of European leaders struggled with during Trump's first term. And the countries that were the most successful in dealing with the United States were those where the leaders made a real effort to build that rapport and that real chemistry. And so I think that that is important. And I do think there is a bit of ground that needs to be made up between President Zelensky and President Trump. But at the end of the day, he understands that President Zelensky is fighting a war. And I think that there is a path forward for the two of them to resolve some of these issues if that's in the cards.
Let's talk about tariffs if we can, particularly when it comes to Canada and Mexico. Due to be introduced, of course, last month, then got postponed. Are we now thinking that they will be imposed tomorrow? Is tomorrow Tariff Tuesday?
Yeah, well, in less than 24 hours, it's certainly possible. You saw Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick on television over the weekend saying that the situation was fluid and that the administration was happy with the cooperation of Canada and Mexico on the immigration and border issues, but that there was still ground to be made when it came to the fentanyl issue. And there, the president is really looking for a reduction in the number of deaths. So where I think this might go is towards a potential suspension, a short-term suspension, just like we saw last month. However, it's also possible that lower level of tariffs do go into effect. I think it will all come down to today, whatever package is presented to the White House and whether or not that's acceptable for the president.
What's fascinating for me, obviously observing it from this side of the Atlantic, is that by Donald Trump putting America first and being quite nationalistic as a leader, that he seemed to have provoked particularly Canada to make a more strident line, that essentially if you're against Trump, you seem to be doing quite well at home, that there's always a reaction, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think Canada also has some of its own domestic challenges with Justin Trudeau stepping down. There is now a race domestically for who's going to lead the country. And so you have seen this become a bit more of a political football than it did, say, on the southern border in terms of Mexico, where the approach of President Sheinbaum has been more workmanlike. While she may disagree with some of President Trump's conclusions, her approach has been, okay, let's just meet the president where he is substantively and work through these issues. Where with Canada, it seems to have a bit more of the political flavor and, frankly, that backlash on the Canadian side, complicating matters even further.
And just very funny with that, Kellyanne, I was reading some commentary over the weekend. You know, he may well turn to the EU next. He suggested he would with tariffs. But this commentator was suggesting that actually the wrong way to deal with Donald Trump is to kind of concede grounds. That, you know, as you've rightly pointed out, Canada and Mexico have given a little bit to get these tariffs postponed. But the argument for that commentator was that will only embolden Donald Trump to go further again, that you can never win. He'll just ask for more and more and more.
Well, I think it'll be up to each leader to decide how they want to engage with President Trump and which negotiating strategy they want to play back. But I can say for many of these things, these are core substantive issues that the president has cared about for decades, particularly on the economic side. And where I have seen countries be more successful in negotiating with President Trump is where they take those concerns seriously and try to come up with creative and practical approaches to address the core issues. The countries that tend to play games, I think, get burnt. And so my advice for any world leader in terms of contemplating how they're going to approach this would be to take seriously the concerns, which are reflective of the American voters, and try to work towards a solution.
Really fascinating stuff. Really appreciate your time this morning. That is Kellyanne Shaw. Thank you. OK, let's bring you some more breaking news this hour. It concerns some of the world's leading tennis tournaments. Let's turn to Mark Kleiman, our City editor. Mark, what have you got for us?
Yeah, Darren, some interesting news from the world of tennis this morning. What I've learned is that CVC Capital Partners, the private equity firm which has a prolific track record of investing in elite sport globally, is bidding to take control of two of the tennis world's most prestigious tournaments. Now, these are the Miami Open and the Madrid Open, both of which take place on the annual tennis tour and feature the world's top male and female tennis players. Now, CVC is understood to be bidding around $1 billion to acquire these assets and some other more minor tournaments from the sports rights agency IMG, which itself has been the subject of a major corporate transaction recently. Now, CVC, which owns stakes in assets like Rugby's Six Nations and the commercial rights to French and Spanish top-flight football, is bidding, as I understand it, against Ari Emanuel. Now, Ari Emanuel is a very well-known figure in Hollywood. He was a former Hollywood talent agent who has built up a company called Endeavour Group Holdings into a global giant in sports and entertainment. Now, Endeavour itself is being taken private in a separate transaction, but Mr. Emanuel is bidding in a personal capacity for these tennis assets against CVC. And if CVC does succeed in this auction, it will be another step towards cementing its stranglehold on elite global sport.
OK, Mark, great stuff. As always, thank you very much indeed, Mark Kleiman there. OK, you're watching Business Live on this Monday morning on Sky News. Coming up next, how WHSmith looks set to disappear from the high street. The plans for a sale but without its name. We'll be explaining all in just a couple of minutes.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's Senior Ireland Correspondent.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
If there's anyone who might know how to fix Northern Ireland's devolved government, it's the American architect.
Changes in circumstance require changes in approach.
The end of the political stalemate, the start of a new chapter for Northern Ireland.
I confirm that I am willing to take up the office of First Minister. My election to the post of First Minister demonstrates the change that's happening on this island.
Catholics and Protestants on different sides, now facing the same threat.
If we both contract COVID-19 and end up in hospital, religion's nothing.
People here are adept at finding hope amid adversity. That's the spirit of a place that punches way above its weight.
We help you understand the world with us. A toxic blue-green algae now poisoning Lough Neagh. It's breaking your heart what has happened here.
It is.
This is a vital resource, a national treasure, now fighting for its very life. They are effectively surrounded by Northern Ireland, and that makes this the most unlikely of international frontiers.
If there's a hard border, I think it'll cripple the country.
Winter is coming. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama.
Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
Sky News, the full story first.
Sky News get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
1,500 movie. I don't want this flight to end. Fly better. Thank you.
Now, Woolworths, Debenhams, Blockbuster, Mothercare, the list of names, I mean, many more that have vanished from the high street in recent years, and it continues to grow, potentially with another one to be added to that list, WHSmith. After more than 230 years, it looks like the retail chain is being sold without the right to use its name. Let's get more on this with Georgia Wright, news editor at the Retail Gazette. Very good morning to you. Just explain this, because it's a bit complicated. Not that the name's going to disappear entirely, but it does seem from essentially the high street.
Yes. So, a potential deal is still looming. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months. But sources understand that some buyers may not be able to use the WHSmith name, which basically will lead to a rebrand for its high street stores. And this is essentially the high street stores that you and I see up and down the country. I think there's some 500 of there. Yeah, it's been a high street staple for, hundreds of years. So it will definitely be another blow for retail. It's a tough market right now. And why is that? Because WHSmith is performing, as I understand it, quite well, particularly when it comes to travel and airports, for example, but not so well selling pens and books on the high street and in towns up and down the country. Yeah, it's a tale of two divisions. 85% of the profits come from its travel arm. In contrast, its high street arm is it's struggling. Across the board, retailers are having a really tough environment. They're grappling with £5 billion of extra costs, from living wage, from national insurance, and WHSmith, its high street arm, it's been struggling for a long time. Consumer sentiment is changing. The offering isn't necessarily the most attractive. There's Amazon. So in contrast, travel's booming, high street, not so much.
Yeah, isn't that the interesting thing is I feel, as a consumer, I'm not entirely sure what WHSmith offers me, as in it's part bookshop, it's part newsagents, but it sells sandwiches and drink. It doesn't feel that it's very good at defining what it now does, what its kind of USP is, if you like.
No, exactly. And, with this cost of living crisis, consumers are very attracted by price, and everybody knows that WHSmith isn't exactly the best place to go if you are searching for value. So you're right, USP, price, it's kind of not hitting the mark on where it should be to survive.
And just very finally, we're talking about high street names. One of them that I didn't list out earlier that disappeared from the high street was Topshop. But this weekend, they've been teasing us a little on Instagram, maybe suggesting that Topshop might be returning to the high street. Is that right?
Yeah, so they didn't rule it out. These teasers that they posted over the weekend, they're most likely alluding to the new standalone website launch. But, hours after they posted that, consumers' comments were loading about, please come back to the high street. And, they haven't ruled it out. I think later down the line, it would be a very smart, sensible choice to make. It's Topshop, an iconic brand, popular on ASOS. I can imagine that if they did make a return to physical stores, they'd be very successful. Yeah.
Yeah, really fascinating. Of course, used to have 70 stores, including on Oxford Street, went into administration in 2020, but could well be returning, I'm sure, on a small scale to our high street. Really appreciate your time. That's Georgia Wright there from the Retail Gazette. Thank you very much indeed. OK, that is it from me for the moment. We're, of course, back with Business Live at 4:30 this afternoon. Do join me then if you can. Up next, though, it is Jane Secker with Sky News today, including the very latest on Ukraine and what is going to happen potentially with any peace deal after that falling out that we were talking about earlier in the programme in the Oval Office on Friday. And also the latest on those Channel crossing numbers, the highest so far this year. That is with Jane next, and I'll see you this afternoon. A very goodbye.